Hey, there's a new documentary on Netflix about DeLoreans, so you know I'm going to talk about that, even if it has nothing to do with video games or really movies or anything. As if you've been watching me for a while, you know that I've been obsessed with the DeLorean car for pretty much my entire life. I'm deep lurking in that community. Yes, that is an actual thing. There's a fascinating history and story behind the car and a lot of myths and misconceptions about them that you're probably going to see in the comments. But I thought it was a perfect time to finally talk more about DeLorean because this documentary seems to be making a pretty decent splash, and it is a pretty crazy story. One thing I really think I want to get across right off the bat, though, if you're looking for something that is just the making of the DeLorean, the iconic Back to the Future car, or what people are now just calling the Deluxo, that random cool flying car from Grand Theft Auto Online, you're not getting that here. What you're getting is the story and now almost like the mythology surrounding the car, the creation of this car, the man behind this car, John DeLorean, his history, just lots of 80s corporate greed and just wild stuff going all over the place, some political intrigue. There's a lot to it, and it really captured the minds of people in the 1980s when it was the main topic, when it was going on, when it was a current event. Now, I think we've seen so much crazy shit since then that this isn't really essentially the trial of the century that it was then, because it was really that, and then it was the OJ trial, and then like a million things after that in terms of race and murder. There was something going on every single week in the 90s, but the story is really wild when you break it down, and I think this is a good breakdown of a lot of it. I'm also going to recommend and probably link some other DeLorean documentaries down in the description because I've watched a lot of them. I've pretty much watched all of them because I'm a weirdo. I also read John Z. DeLorean's book, so I have some complex thoughts about this types of stuff. But this documentary is interesting because it's actually, I saw it a couple months ago. It was actually a BBC documentary, and they've kind of technically repackaged and reproduced it here for Netflix with some tweaks. And what it does is essentially lays the whole thing out where it establishes who John DeLorean is. So if you don't know who John DeLorean is, he was essentially a pioneer in the American auto industry when it was absolutely blowing up. He was one of like the Detroit heavyweights, which was really the place for cars. And he worked in various places and ultimately grew to success through working at GM, General Motors, when he was with the Pontiac division. Essentially what he did was come up with the concept in terms of like engineering and marketing the Pontiac GTO, which was a big deal at the time because it was like a modern, fun, fast, sexy, and somewhat affordable sports car that really, along with a bunch of other cars, started to really take the world by storm and capture the culture of like fun and exciting car culture, especially for younger people. So from there, he became hot shit. Just pretty much like the star like guy, like kind of like the Elon Musk or Steve Jobs type of thing for cars at that time, until he decided to just like completely go off on his own, fight the mainstream, the big three or big so car companies, and go out on his own and try and start his own company and his own car. And that vision was the DeLorean. From there, because it's such an uphill battle, because he was one person and obviously getting a team of good people together, just to get financing, to build up a car, to design a car, to get them produced, to get orders for them. There's a whole wild amount of work that goes into all of it. And the documentary doesn't really go into the process of making the car, but really the mindset behind DeLorean and what kind of motivated him to get this project done. And what it took. And what it took was a lot of hustling and ultimately some desperation to where ultimately he... It's so weird to even say this out loud. He kind of got wrapped up in like a cocaine smuggling jam in essentially trying to fund a cocaine deal to profit and then put that money back into the company to save it. And it was like maybe entrapment, maybe he was set up by the government, kind of. It's kind of messed up and weird, but also it's ego, it's hubris, it's perseverance, it's that hustle culture. It's a lot of things. And the cool thing about the story is that you can really interpret it in a lot of ways. In this documentary, it does kind of wrap up painting him in more of a negative light. If you talk to a lot of DeLorean car fans, they think he's like the second coming, like he's like the Lord above. I don't really think so. I think this whole thing is a cautionary tale, but I think it's a really, really interesting one. And I actually think that the story out there is wilder, and that's why I'm going to recommend more documentaries if you found this one kind of interesting, because this one is well made and well composed, but there's so much more to it, especially just with what they did with, so DeLoreans were manufactured in Belfast in Ireland, and it was a whole big thing at the time because of the Troubles, or essentially the war in Northern Ireland. And DeLorean fits into that in a very interesting way, from essentially giving and kind of uniting some Protestants and Catholics locally, giving them a job when the country and the area was struggling a lot, but also seemingly scamming the British government out of a lot of money. And wow, it just gets so weird. So it's just a crazy thing, from the car to how he got to where he was and ultimately died penniless. So there's so much more stuff that this documentary, even though it's pretty comprehensive, it's broken into 3 different chunks. So they're all like 45 minutes each, so you can watch it pretty much at your leisure. There's more to it. And I think the documentary, the only thing that I wasn't into about it was that it doesn't quite get across how crazy and how far-reaching this tale is, because it focuses so much on him. It goes back to his childhood and talks about his motivations and how he was as a student. It goes into a lot. And I don't really think some people, especially younger people, like they're not going to find that as interesting because they weren't caught up with him, knowing about him in the 80s and the 90s. Myth and Mogul does partially showcase like why I'm so into this stuff. Like, yes, the car is awesome because of Back to the Future. It's the time machine. Awesome. But there's so much more behind it, just in terms of culture, geopolitics, 80s greed, ambition, compromise on that ambition. There's a lot to it. And it really is such a cool story. So that's why, like, when I saw Myth and Mogul pop up on Netflix, I was really excited for more people to be exposed to this story, or at least hear a part of it. But there is other stuff out there, like Framing John DeLorean, even the movie with Lee Pace as John DeLorean and Jason Sudeikis, called Driven, that go into the whole cocaine bust thing, which is essentially its own whole big thing with a breakdown with multiple players and craziness. So really what I'm trying to say is that, like, this documentary might seem a little boring, a little dull at times, just because it's only scratching the surface, because you have the actual making of the car and the pop culture time period of the car and the compromises with the car and the massive amount of failures with making the DeLorean. And then you have the cocaine bust and the whole cocaine deal, which are like almost like 2 other movies or 2 whole other books in a series of books. But I do think this is a good place to get started if you're interested in this tale. Honestly, there's a lot of like true crime and documentary type stuff on Netflix, and they've been hit or miss. I think some of them feel like they've, like, especially some murder mystery ones, they've been padded out and kind of stretched out over multiple episodes where it really could have just been an hour-long documentary. This one, Myth and Mogul, thankfully doesn't do that. As much as I said it does take a little bit too much, like going into his personal life or his family life and stuff, it all feels comprehensive, and it doesn't feel like filler, at least. But it's a fun and sad and weird and, like I said, cautionary tale. And I think Myth and Mogul does a pretty decent job. Like I said, if you want to know more about this stuff and some of the more sexy, more interesting stuff about it, I'll definitely link all of it down in the description below. And I also want to hear from you guys if you want more DeLorean content. I feel like this video is going to get no views because the YouTube algorithm is going to hate it because it's about nothing, but I don't care. I'm making stuff that I find fun. I'm talking about what I want to talk about here. So thank you guys for hanging out with me and listening. I really want to hear what you think about this documentary if you watched it. Were you just scrolling through Netflix and you saw that pop up and you said, oh, cool car, and then clicked on it and found out that it's barely about the car? Were you still into the tale, of the magic of it all, the weirdness of it all? Let's talk. Anything DeLorean down in the comments. If you like this video, maybe consider clicking the like button or sharing it with your DeLorean friends. I'd really appreciate that. But thanks for being here. I'm Jake Baldino. You can subscribe because video games. Pizza's on me.